Hi guys, video 8. I decided to go with the book of Job. Now, I love the book of Job. It's great. It shows us this paradox of how the best, most holy man is put in a horrible situation. He is basically given the worst lot in life. Job is another one of our typological book that prefigures Christ. Because again, if we're going to talk about the best guy getting dealt out the worst hand, sounds a little bit like Christ, right? Okay, so the book of Job, how are we meant to understand this book? It is not historical. Job likely never existed, okay? This book was written about 600 years before Christ. We don't know who wrote it, and we also know that the story evolved. So there's a chunk of it, and then it changed, and then somebody else added to it. It evolved. Nowadays, if we have an unauthored story that continues to evolve, it drives us mad. We want to know who wrote it, why they wrote it, when they wrote it, all of those things. Back then, that copyright was not really a huge issue. But this book is meant to be a model for us. It's meant to teach us, how are we supposed to suffer? I love this story because Scripture is confusing as heck, okay? It is so confusing. If anyone's like, oh, want to go closer to God, read Scripture. Okay, that's fun and all, but you kind of need somebody with you, because if you dive into this book and you're just reading it, taking it for face value, you're going to be like, what? What in the world? I can't even find God in this portion of the story. It's very confusing, okay? Now, Job is in the Old Testament, all right? It's a prophetic book meant to teach us about how to suffer. It did not actually happen, okay? This book, it's actually a poem. Chapter 1 through 2 is the prologue of the poem. Then the dialogue portion goes from 3 to 42, and then 42 through 46 is the epilogue portion of the poem. And Job, the story of Job actually takes on, it just front battles the idea of the prosperity gospel. The prosperity gospel is rampant, okay? Rampant. And it's unhealthy, because this book of Job, in the book of Job, God asks Job, who am I? Do you even know who I am? Okay, if we bought into the prosperity gospel, God is the man that rewards you if you're good and punishes you if you're bad. Okay. No. Okay. God, is he a judge? Yeah. But that is not what being in a relationship with God is. Starting in the book of Deuteronomy, we get this idea that if you are wealthy, if you have healthy family members, if you have lots of stuff, you're God's favorite. And then the people who are poor, the people who are injured, the people who have birth defects, you were wrapped up in sin somewhere, so you got punished by God. The book of Job takes on this idea and says, absolutely not. That is not who God is, okay? He's not just wheeling out punishments to bad people and giving them a crappy lot on earth. That is not what's happening, okay? Jesus takes this on. I talked about this when I talked about why the Pharisees and Sadducees were so put off by what Jesus was doing, because it was believed that if a child had a birth defect, it was because the parents were awful sinners, and so they were being punished by having a child with a defect. Or if a woman couldn't have a baby, it was because God was punishing her because she's a nasty sinner. This entire concept of being able to look at someone and say, God doesn't like them. That's not who God is, okay? First writing prompt, who's God? What's his purpose? Is he the guy that's just meant to give you lots of fun things because you're so nice and good? Does that make us a good Christian if ultimately the only reason we behave is so we get stuff? Like, are we actually good people if we're like, I'm so good because I want to have lots of stuff? No, you are not truly a good-hearted person if the only reason you have a relationship with God is because you want things, okay? That's greed. That's a deadly sin. No. All right, so let's start to talk about what actually happens in this literary creation. I love it. I love this book so much. So, second question, does suffering disprove God? This is your writing prompt. Does suffering disprove God? A lot of people say yes. There are a lot of people who are atheists who say, I can tell you there is no God because I can look around this world and see suffering. This is the $1 million question. Does suffering disprove God? Now, in Job, The devil has just been like, promenading around the world, and he sees God, and God's like, hey, check out Job. He is top notch. He is excellent. He is, he worships me, follows me, love this guy. Excellent. And the devil looks at him and he's like, God, the only reason Job is into you is because he's got 10 kids. He's got a smoking hot wife. I don't know if she's actually smoking hot. We can just assume for the sake of the story. But he's got a wife. He's got all this livestock, all this land. That's the only reason he loves you. It's easy to love you if things are good. And I will say that is absolutely true. It is so easy to be a good, holy, loving person when you're not suffering. Okay? And so the devil's like, let me screw with him and we'll see if he stays faithful to you. And God's like, okay, just don't kill him. Have at it. All right. Again, I want to emphasize this is a story meant to teach us how to suffer. This did not actually happen. Okay? Did not actually happen. God and the devil were not just chilling, having coffee and maybe a scone and being like, yeah, let's screw with him and see if he still follows me. No, that's not what the story is about. So bad stuff begins to happen. Again, Job is this prefiguring figure, redundant. He prefigures Christ. This wonderful guy who takes on so much suffering. Okay, so Job, he loses everything. He loses his family. He loses his livelihood. And it gets to a point in the story where he is sitting in a pile of poop. And at one point, his wife wants him to forsake God. Like, God's turned on us. Like, we don't need him anymore, okay? We had all this stuff, and then God showed very blatantly, I'm done with them, and now we're suffering, so turn on him. His friends come to sit with him in this pile of poo, and, they're like, Job, you are in this place because clearly there's a sin that you're not remedying for. You have got to get your crap together, remedy the sin so that you can get all your stuff back. And Job's just like, that's not what happens. That's not what is happening. Again, this is a horrible theological lesson that his friends are trying to give him. Job, you are suffering because God is punishing you for sins. That is not the role of sins in our life, okay? When we sin, there's usually a reason behind it. When we discover that reason, we get growth. It's kind of the same thing with suffering because I can't remember if I already said this or not, so I might be repeating myself. But with suffering, if we have a plant that a limb falls off in a storm, usually that spot is an amazing place for new growth of the tree, and it makes the tree healthier. For us, when we break our bones, when the bones heal, they're actually stronger at the point of the break than they were originally. This is what suffering does to us. Now, Job gets worn down. He's exhausted, and he's crying out to the end, and he's, just like, God, what's happening? I don't understand. What is happening to me? And he kind of lashes out, and God says to him, who am I? Job doesn't know. So this is your next writing prompt. Who is God and what is his purpose? Is God's purpose to let us, be spoiled children and give us whatever we want? And if we don't get what we want, then we're out of relationship with him. And what God says to Job is, I'm not going to explain my design to you. There's this enormous, beautiful picture, and you are only privy to seeing about this much. You get to see a very small window of what's actually happening. I'm not going to explain all this to you. But I will tell you that the suffering, the things that we endure on earth, that's not the whole picture, okay? The reason that this book to me is so special is because it really unlocks something. It lets us know that when crappy things happen, sometimes crappy things happen. It does not mean that God doesn't love you or that God has turned his back on you. The thing is we're living an imperfect life in an imperfect world, okay? This world is our opportunity to choose. It's our opportunity to choose God. Because yes, are there wicked, evil people who are going to have everything on earth that they've ever wanted? There are. There are amazingly good people that are going to lose absolutely everything. But again, who is God? Is God the person that we want as the puppet master, making everybody bend to his will? Or is God that person who wants that loving connection with us? Okay, that's our big question. Now, the typology behind this. Job was an innocent victim in this whole thing. And he shows us through his behavior how to suffer. We're all going to suffer. If you haven't been hit with it yet, it will eventually hit you. But we see this beautiful person who is suffering, and he is very aware that just because I suffer does not mean God does not love me. It does not mean that God has turned himself on me. I am not being punished because I didn't do good enough. Okay? Again, we talked about the prodigal son. That's really not the point. Okay? You're going to mess up. We are not going to be perfect. We're not going to do things amazing. God's still going to love you. Okay? Now, when we look at Jesus, what did Jesus do? He quite honestly suffered from the start. When he began his ministry and began leading people to God, for every person he gained for God, he made another enemy. Ultimately, they murdered him, okay? He was a victim of an excruciating murder because, he saw the bigger picture. He was the bigger picture, but he was pulling people to Christ. Now, I want your final take on the book of Job. This is the last portion of your writing prompt. How do you see things in life? Did you originally view it as like, like the world is just karma? So if I do good things will happen to me. If I do bad things will happen to me. Because again, the book of Job is saying like, no, you can be an excellent person. Crap can still happen. And you can be a crap person and stuff will still happen. Okay. Give me your take. Okay. Let me know what you think of this. Let me know if you maybe at one point bought into the prosperity gospel idea where if I'm a well-behaved person, I will get all the favorite things. And if I'm a bad person, I'll get crappy things. Let me know. Because again, this book is showing us suffering is part of life. It'll change you. It'll make you a stronger person. It'll make you a different kind of person. But unless we are oriented to the bigger picture, which is that ultimate relationship with God, unless we are oriented there, suffering is going to be one of those things that completely derails us. Okay. It is going to separate us. It is going to take that piece of us, that connection with God, and it will start to break it apart. It's so important to understand it's not about this earth. Okay. I don't really know how else to say it. It's not about what we're dealing with right now. It's not about what we see around us. There's something so much greater in store for every single one of us. And that greater thing that's in store for us is that full connection with Christ. Okay. All right. I hope you enjoyed this video. What am I doing next? I think we're going to talk about maybe virtues next. Not sure. But anyway, all right. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.